We'll get started. Okay, ancient India.
Is this chapter 2?
This is chapter 2. I didn't want this thing to get banged, but now I'll put it here. Whoops, it's going to get banged up anyway. Okay. All right, what you see here is a time when all the whole world consisted of one big supercontinent. It was called Pan. The word Pan is Greek word, it means everything. Now, at one time this was suspect, but if you look on a globe or a world map, you'll notice that North and South America fit snugly against Europe and Africa. It was once, it's now been established that all the world was one big supercontinent, and these continents split. It's because the Earth is sitting on tectonic plates, and every once in a while, these plates, where these plates come together, are called fault lines. And every once in a while, these plates will move, and that'll result in earthquakes. But there have been at least once, and maybe twice this world, where these plates have just split apart and floated along. Floated along on what? Not every student would believe this, but we now believe that the Earth is sitting on a huge body of water, that there's more water beneath the oceans, under the crust, than there is above, and the continents are floating. However, believe what you will, folk, you can't actually prove that quite yet.
Don't most scientists believe it's like magma?
Believe in what?
That it's like magma, like liquid?
Well, most of them still believe it's magma. And I mentioned that it might be something else because just bought this morning. But anyway. Now, here's where India comes in. India broke off from right in the southern part of Africa. Antarctica broke off and went south. Australia broke off and went east. But India broke off and went north and wound up bumping into the southern part of Asia. And the result was the Himalayan mountains. Now I'm not going to write that down, but the tall, high Himalayan mountains that are the tallest mountains on the face of the earth. And they are very, very tall, including the tallest one that we know of, Mount Everest. Now, about less than a year ago, a big earthquake struck that part of the world and knocked some of these mountains down by as much as 5 feet. In other words, this was a horrific earthquake. But anyway, India, the subcontinent of India, became where it is and was bordered by tall mountains because it bumped into the southern part of Asia. And some people say it is still in the process of bumping in and will eventually push up the Himalayan mountains, perhaps still more. All right. Anyway, the earliest people we know of who lived in India were the Dravidians. D-R-A-V-I-D. I'll put that word on a board in a little bit. Actually, well, okay. Pardon me. The very first civilization we know about is the Harappan. All right, as the first civilization. Yeah, first. We don't know for sure who the Harappans were. Okay, so I'll stand corrected. The Dravidians might have been related to the Harappans. But anyway, the Harappan people Where they came from is debated, just like the Sumerians. We don't know who they were, where they came from. We have found some of their writing, but unlike the Sumerian writing, where we have a bunch of it, the Harappan writing has not been deciphered, and we're going to be running into this several times in history. In order for writing to be deciphered, you have to have a lot and a lot of it, and it really helps if you find it written along the side of writing that's in a language we do understand. That's why we have the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta, don't write it. The Rosetta Stone was written in 3 languages. We knew one of them, and then we were able to decipher the other 2 because we figured out that, or we guessed that the other 2 were saying the same thing that the one language we knew was. Anyway, Harappan we cannot decipher. The Dravidians may have been related to the Harappans. We do not know for sure. But they had a civilization in the Indus Valley in what is today Pakistan. I'm not going to write that word down, but just get some idea. The Indus River is in today what is Pakistan. It's actually almost separates India from Pakistan. There are 2 main cities. Now, they actually had hundreds of little towns, but their 2 main cities, as far as we know, were Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Actually, that word is sometimes spelled with a capital D and a hyphen. I've seen it spelled just one word, and I've seen it hyphenated like this, and I've seen it hyphenated with a last part of it lowercase, so I'm not that particular about the spelling. Now, Mohenjo-Daro folk, I'm going to repeat what I've already stated. Mohenjo-Daro seems to show an advanced people. Their streets were neatly laid out and carefully planned. They had a sewer system. Their houses, it almost looks like everybody in Mohenjo-Daro was on an equal footing with everybody else. They had no rich man's section. They had no poor man's section. All the houses were just about equal in size and appear to be equal in wealth and equal in amenities. They all had plumbing facilities. They generally, though, did not have a window in the front, indicating that they were fearful of looters. So they might, to get into the houses, you had to go through it like an alleyway and come in through the back door because they didn't have a door to the front or a window in the front. They had a patio in the middle, but still that's like they had just one entrance. They all had what we might today call a sunroof. No, they're nearly equal. There doesn't seem to have been a king among them or a prince. Now, I'm not saying this is right or good, but nevertheless, this appears to be what they were. And the brickwork. The brickwork that was very well built and very well laid, so much so that the bricks have stood for about 3,000 years and not crumbled or decayed so much. There are some exceptions to that. Well, this time last year, I had assigned the students 2 papers, and the second paper was on Mohenjo-Daro. All right, the word Mohenjo-Daro means city of the dead.
City of the dead.
City of the dead. When we found it, it was discovered in 1923. Yes?
Like you said, we don't understand the Harappan language. How did we decide that that's the city of the dead?
Well, because we may not understand Harappan, but that word is not Harappan. Yeah. See, we don't know what the name of it originally was. The name we know of it to go by is City of the Dead.
Is it true that historians usually, when they find places and artifacts, they'll just name it?
And a lot of times they will, but they try to discover what was the original name, and as far as possible. Now, there's a lot of Indian villages we discover we don't know what the original name is. We have asked Indians, and sometimes they can tell us, oh yeah, the old Indians will say such and such people lived here, and They disappeared, and my great-grandfather learned from his great-grandfather that such and such, but a lot of times they don't even know. There's, again, no written records. Passed down orally, and I have that word oral was on the exam, but passed down the word of mouth from generation to generation. It's in a lot of, all right, now here's the trick about Mohenjo-Daro, folk. When we went into it, we found, I believe, something like 40 bodies. The bodies were lying on the street, some of them face down. At least one of them was a mother or a woman, female body protecting a small child. And at least one of them was a male body and a female body. They were like holding hands. You generally don't bury couples in that kind of a pose. What it indicates, folk, is that the city of Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed abruptly and suddenly. I'm hesitant because, I mean, I recall last spring, the papers, the student wrote on it, disappointed me. But a lot of persons, I mean, you can look this up for yourself, a lot of persons believe that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed in a nuclear holocaust, like the city of Bur. And that the reason you don't find any more bodies was that they were warned ahead of time to get out. A bunch of them got out. And the ones that didn't perished rather suddenly, but they had some knowledge that the destruction was coming, so they had time at least to get down and cover their faces. At least one couple had time to hold hands. And they're lying in the middle of the street. You don't bury people, but they eventually were covered by 3,000 years of dust. Yes?
Are there any volcanoes in that area?
I know, I get that. The one theory, volcanoes, meteorites. As far as I know, there were no volcanoes in that area. Now, as for meteorites, we've had 2 meteorites hit the Earth, big ones, in the last 100 years. One hit Siberia in 1908, the other one hit in 2013 in Russia. Nobody was killed by them. Meteorites do not target, generally do not target semi-metropolitan areas. You have to realize that the Earth, about the Earth, 3/4 of it is at least underwater, 2/3, 3/4 is underwater. And if the part of it is above water, more than half of that is uninhabited. And most of the Earth's people live in a relatively small population pockets. The idea that, now, even though it's possible, a meteorite could hit another thing, folk, that Mohenjo-Daro has a high level of radioactivity even after 3,000 years. Meteorites do not leave behind radioactivity. If that's not enough, whatever hit Mohenjo-Daro, it meant that man and animals did not come in. In other words, the bodies were not gnawed by rodents. Man and animal did not come in for 3,000 years. Then 3,000 years, somebody discovered under the brush and under the undergrowth, there was this city lying down there, undisturbed. They began to dig around it and found about 40-some bodies that apparently had not been interred. In other words, they had not been buried in a formal burial, but just simply left to lie on the top of the street. And nobody ever came back to get the treasury. Now, if you know anything about a nuclear explosion, folks, if you ever have one, if you survive it, throw away your gold, your jewelry, any such like. It will contaminate your body for hundreds of years to come. Contaminate your body with radioactivity for hundreds of years to come. Throw away all your gold and jewelry because it becomes radioactive really, really fast. Whoever did not go into Mohenjo-Daro when it was destroyed knew, hey, we don't touch the gold, we don't touch the silver. In fact, we don't even go in. Even the animals seem to know not to go in. Now, again, all right.
So no one knows what happened.
All right, now we're going to get some hints, folks, in the writings. Now, I just said that the Harappan writing has not been read, but there are a bunch of other writings. Before I get to the Vedas, now the Vedas we have written. The Vedas are written in Sanskrit. When I was a young man, somebody told me if you ever learn Sanskrit, you can go to your big university and name your price. They'll hire you instantly. That might not be probably is not as true as it was then. But before we get to Sanskrit, a new group of people came in. All right, now, we're going to run into this name in the 20th century. Who am I thinking about? Adolf Hitler. Yeah, all right. Then there was the Aryans. And around 1800 BCE, and that's update is approximate, people from Northern Europe began to move south. Maybe with climate change, it might have been global cooling, but they began, among them who moved south, the Latins, they settled in Italy. The Greeks, they settled, of course, in Greece. At the same time, the Medes and Persians settled in Medio and Persia. We've talked about the Persians. And then the Aryans. All these people were Indo-European people. The Aryans settled in India and took over India. The Aryans are known to have been horsemen, nomadic horsemen, excellent fighters from horseback. And that's strange because eventually the Indian people abandoned horses for elephants, but the Aryans, now, and, all right, folks, this is just the facts. You understand? I don't in any way agree with what I'm about to say, but this is the facts. The Aryans originally were white. And this is what really, I think, enamored Hitler with them. They believed in white supremacy. Now, you may not know that Adolf Hitler, I mean, I've had some black people, black men admire Adolf Hitler, and folk, I don't know why, do they know that Adolf Hitler emasculated every black man he could find to keep their genes from spreading any farther? And when, they're about to make a movie of it, when Jesse Owens, the black runner, raced in the 1936 Olympics, Hitler had to sit in the stands with a look of just disbelief on his face, watch while a black runner outran all the white runners in the race, because this went against what he believed about racial superiority. But the Aryans were originally white. Now, they would turn over in their grave, they would have to, over time, they became black. Now, folk know it was not the bright Indian sunshine that darkened their skin. No, I'm surprised how many college do not know acquired characteristics cannot be inherited. That means giraffes did not get long necks by stretching out. And they once did experiment with mice where they cut off their tails for 50 generations, and the 51st generation had just as long a tail as the first generation. Acquired characteristics are not passed on, yes?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the color of the skin just based on melanin? Which is
On melanin, it's all based on melanin. Yes, it's all. But hey, but now what you're saying here, and what I believe and agree with, is not at all. I have to teach you this because it's important. But it was not what the Aryans believed, and not what Adolf Hitler believed. And what they believed did a lot to influence the course of history, and not what a lot of Southern white supremacists believed even 40 and 50 years ago. But today they're kind of embarrassed to show their heads. But anyway, they were originally white. They became black because a bunch of them intermarried with a local black population, and this changes color of their skin. So it wasn't something in the soil, it wasn't the bright sunshine, it was they intermarried with a local population, and over time, they became black. Now.
So they had kids with the Indians and they became black?
Yeah, they had kids, but they married Indian women. They married Dravidian women.
But Indian women are not black.
Well, I mean, the people in India are dark, very dark.
Yeah, they can be very
Yeah, they are. Yes, they
Why
are.
would they be considered black people?
Why would they be biracial?
I'm talking about this happened 3,000 years ago.
Oh, they just
And
kept
over
happening.
time, yeah, it kept on happening. It's 3,000 years. I mean, now, again, this is still going on. Now, if you talk to a person in India today, they're going to deny that it is. But in India today, the lighter your skin, the higher you're looked upon, and the darker your skin, the more you're looked down on. This, I mean, if you want to deny it, go right ahead, you can. This is, from what I'm, this is still going on in today, but they hush it up when we're in among the Westerners, so they don't want to talk about it. But back home, they're still, I mean, so some of them became darker than others. Some of them are dark. They have different shades of darkness, but most of the people in India today are dark skin. But they have Caucasian features. So you can tell an Indian from an African because of their facial features. So some of you nodding your head, you know what I'm talking about. Yes. Yeah.
So you mean that they became darker, they didn't become black?
No, they became dark, but they did not become African.
Right.
Yeah, they were not African. They became dark-skinned only, but they were not. They have Caucasian features with dark skin. Again, if you see one, you'll know what I'm talking about.
So Indians were really light to begin with?
The Aryans, not the Indians.
Oh,
The Indians were dark to begin with. The Aryans, who came from Europe, were light. And they introduced light skin.
How can the Indians have a class system based on how dark you are? They started off dark anyway.
Well, okay, we're going to jump ahead. So the Indian people set up a caste system. And they're notorious for some of the caste system where they had 5 castes, and it wasn't all based on skin color, but all of it was based on skin color. All right, I've got to move fast. Anyway, now, the Aryans had the 4 Vedas that were written in Sanskrit. Now, folk, here's the catch-22. And that's the original Veda. There are 4 Vedas. The original Veda is called the Rig. Now that word is spelled with an E, but I had some student, about 4 or 5 years ago, correct me, it's pronounced like an A, like the Spanish do. Vedas. The Rig Veda contains, and folk, if you don't believe it, look it up. The Rig Veda contains references to aircraft, to weapons of mass destruction, to spacecraft, to flying to other planets, and to wars that were supremely super destructive, including a reference that there was a city known by a different name than Mohenjo-Daro, but it might have been Mohenjo-Daro, where they warned, get out of the city, we're going to destroy it. The people in the cities, most of them got out, a few of them didn't. With the result that they destroyed the city and the persons who remained behind all died. This is the written record,
So,
such as it is.
the Vedas are what?
The Vedas, okay, the Vedas are like the Hindu Bible, sacred writings. Sacred writings, yes, sacred. And of course, if any of you know anything at all about the Judeo-Christian Bible, it contains history, it contains poetry, it contains songs, it contains rules and laws.
So
The Vedas are the same thing. It contains what they call history.
Sanskrit is their type, right?
Yeah, they wrote it in Sanskrit. Now, Sanskrit is no longer a spoken language. It's like Sumerian, like Latin, Sanskrit. These languages were once spoken. They're once spoken, yeah. But over time, these languages died. But they still, the original documents were written in Sanskrit, and to read them properly, you have to read them in Sanskrit. Even though they have been translated to English. They have been, and again, folks, if you don't believe this, look it up for yourself. The evidence is not final, it's not conclusive, it is subject to interpretation. You can believe what you want to believe. I mean, how clear can I make it? Or you can disbelieve it. But folks, the records are there. All right. Anyway, 4 Vedas. Now, during the time that the Aryans initially took over, they developed a system that has become part of Hinduism, that is the caste system. Now, in the back of our mind, folk, every one of us will have to admit that we classify people as being better than us, equal with us, or beneath us. We all do it. But the people of India actually put these into rigid caste, and that made it difficult for a person to move up and down the social ladder. And the caste you were born in was a caste that you would die in, and your children were going to be in that caste, and their children. And you'd remain in that caste supposedly forever and ever. Caste system is the way of, and they wound up having 5 castes, with the upper caste being the priest, the religious people, the next caste being the nobles and the royal, the kings and royalty. You know, they looked on the religious people being higher. The French wound up doing the same thing in the late Middle Ages. Then the middle caste was like the warrior caste. They prized their warriors highly. Below them were the merchants, and then below them were at the very, very bottom were the pariahs. These were the outcasts. These were the bottom. The pariahs are sometimes considered the untouchables. Make sure you don't even brush against them because they'll brush off on you. They did the dirty work. Well, they were not more than, they were worse than just the peasants. They were the ones at the bottom of the society. They did the dirty work, and they had no hope of ever becoming better in this life. Now, Now, they did have anything that pertains to India is known as Hindu. So that Hindu word, Hindu is a broad term, but the Hindu religion believes strongly, among other things, in reincarnation. In other words, in this life, you could not rise higher. But even the pariahs, if they lived a good life as a pariah, they might come back in the next life in a higher caste. And you would keep coming back over and over again. And hopefully, now of course if you loused up in this life, you could expect to come back as a lower caste person. But hopefully you would come back as a higher person. This religion, the Hinduism, does not have a founder. I mean, unlike, if you look at my page on compared religions, Hinduism, we don't know exactly when it began. It seems to evolve, to develop over time. And what we find when the records become fully available is what we see here. They did at one time worship older gods, the chief god being Deus. But over time, he faded in importance, and new gods took the place. Eventually, India developed more and more and more gods, so each local village had its own god, and each family had its god, until they wound up developing over 1 million different gods. Now, if you talk to a Hindu person, if he knows that you're a monotheist, he'll try to say, oh, we really are monotheists ourselves, but all these gods are really part of one spirit, so they're really one. So we are also monotheists, the same as you. Again, to us on the outside, I mean, those of us who are, they appear to be very extremely polytheistic. To them, they'll tell you, oh, these gods are all one and the same. But Deus was one of their old gods, and that reminds us of the Spanish word Dios. And because in the Spanish and the Aryans were Indo-European, or it almost looks like the Greek Zeus, Dios, Zeus, almost, or the Chinese Shang, from which we get our word deity. Deity, Deus, Dios. At one time, it appears that these people, the Indians in China, were monotheistic. But over time, they began to look that their one god was too distant for them, and they began to embrace a whole lot of other gods. And also, over time, they developed a belief in a caste system that would eventually, if you were good enough, now if you were bad, you would come back as an animal, most notoriously as a cow. Their favorite animal is the cow, the bull, the cow. And they look on, well, because they believe that creatures progress from animal to human as they die, that if they're good, they can progress upward. They look on all life as being sacred, including animal life. I watched a documentary one time where a king cobra slithered into a garden. And some of the people there who were farmer recognized the king cobra, what he was. They didn't kill the snake. No, that snake, even the snake is sacred. They called in a special snake handler who located the cobra and carried it to some remote area where it would never come back. But in one line in that documentary I'll never forget, human beings and king cobras cannot live together. One of them is going to destroy the other for sure. In this case, though, they might say they worked out an agreement to where the king cobra was moved and the humans went back to work in their garden. Be that as it may. Now, folks, I will state this on the record. The people of India do not have anything that we might call compassion. Now, I've had more than one student tell me that what I'm about to say is true. This, what I'm saying, was true at least when I was younger, and may still be true. Trucks used to go around Indian cities and look for dead bodies and fallen human bodies and pick them up, take them outside the city, and just cover them over. No funeral. A person in India, an old person, might be walking on the street and just drop dead, and the rest of the people just pass on, nobody care. Eventually the truck compassion. And your book says this much, compassion is lacking. But that's just a bunch of, in your book it's a bunch of words. Okay, compassion is lacking. Fine and dandy. They don't tell you the extent of compassion is lacking. Now, I have noticed from my experience that persons who are extreme animal lovers, and the Hindu people love animals, can sometimes have a super heartless attitude toward their fellow human beings. If what I said offends you, maybe I'm supposed to offend you. But it's just the facts. What's that?
So those big words say all of India lacks compassion, especially since like.
Well, Mother Teresa did a lot.
Mahatma Gandhi,
Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa did a lot to change. Mother Teresa told, hey, these people who are sick, they used to just take sick people, no attempt to heal them, just put them in well, a lot of them could be cured. And she said, hey, most of these people you're putting away to die can be cured and can live a good many more years if you would just take care of them. She did a lot to change that. So some of this might have changed. Also, everybody has been influenced by outsiders in the modern world. Now, in the ancient world, you're talking about isolated pockets of humanity. India was one pocket, China was another pocket, Africa was another pocket, North America another pocket, South America another pocket, the Middle East another pocket, Europe. These pockets developed. Then, after 1500, the whole world began to come together, and a lot of the practices of the Hindus were condemned by the outside world. And eventually, the outside pressures have forced changes on everybody, including Westerners, including Chinese, including Japanese, outside influences, forced changes on the people of India. They had a few other customs, which I'll get into before the semester is out, that put them in odds with the rest of the world also. Among them was young girls marrying as young as 9 years old. But if that's not bad enough.
Well, that also happened in Christian.
Well, but now let me finish. When their husbands died, their wives were expected to build a big fire and throw themselves on the fire in their lives. This practice called Sanj. This is in the book now. This came under a lot of condemnation from outside Westerners who condemned these practices, particularly after the British took over and they found these problems awkward. Now, marriages between young children and grown adults happened a lot in the ancient and medieval world. So it's not in, yes.
That's pretty sick.
What's the life expectancy of growth?
A lot of it. Now that's something else.
Yeah.
The life expectancy was an average of 22 years. That had a lot to do with it. So, okay, folk, you can't condemn them for it. They did what they had to do because of their conditions they lived under. Their life was so short. Again, this was done by Europeans. This was done by Africans. And now, what I was hesitant to tell, but I'm going to say it now. Mohammed also married a 9-year-old girl. Mohammed, the founder of Islam. I mean, you know, this is not being sent. But again, I want to get you to understand, this was a widespread practice at the time. Today it is illegal, it's soundly condemned as being unfair and immoral and a whole bunch of other things. But they did what they had to do to survive. Yes?
Some cultures today still like go with release time.
Some cultures still do. Yes.
Yes.
All right, wait, anyway, we need to move on. Your book will say that the ancient Indians knew that the earth is a sphere, and they charted the heavenly bodies, and they charted the paths of the planets. So they were pretty advanced in astronomy. Yes, astronomy has been one of the sciences that led humanity on a path upward. Sacrifice was a key element of Hindu religion, and originally it appears to involve human sacrifice. This is in the book. I mean, then later they said, no, we will not sacrifice humans anymore. We'll only sacrifice animals. So, I mean, it's just true that I said that, just said that animal life was considered very important. And yet, when it came to the gods, they would offer up animals as sacrifice, but they would not eat the meat from these animals. Asceticism. All right, what do I mean by asceticism?
Like, just the looks of it.
Deprive yourself. There's several ways to be an ascetic. One is to do without food, fasting. Fasting a lot, lying on a bed of spikes, walking on a hot iron, lying on a bed of hot coals. These things, the Hindu people believe that these would help a person escape the confines of his mortal body and transcend his ordinary thoughts and be able to rise up above the mundane and ordinary world into a higher level of understanding and a higher level of existence. They use it to gain deeper spiritual insights. Asceticism was used as a means to communicate with the gods. A lot of people have done this, folks. Even among Christians, a lot of Christians practice fasting, believing that this will get them into a higher level, spiritual level, and believing that this will enable God to communicate with them more when they get their mind off of the material world and off of their hunger and pain. And the practice eventually evolved into a practice that's very common today that we call yoga. Again, the word yoga, I believe it means union, basically a union of your spirit with the spirits of the gods. Now, I want to say this. A lot of young people my generation were searching for a spiritual meaning, and a lot of them went to India to find the spiritual meaning. And finally, the Indian government said to the American young men and women, stay back in the States, find your spiritual meaning to life there, because all you do when you come here is complain, because the people of India would eat food that had bugs crawling all over it. They would eat food that we Americans just could not stand. And the flour they made the bread with, they couldn't even get rid of the bugs before they made the flour, etc., etc. And after a while, the Americans would complain, this is filthy, this is dirty, we don't like this. And the government of India finally said, stay back in the States. You just can't take this. Again, for most Indians, life was short and hard, but the caste system helped them maintain. I might say in some ways the caste system helped them to maintain their sanity. Their ultimate state of reality was Brahman. Brahman was where they would get, where they would no longer be coming back to earth. They would have reached the highest level of spirituality. And here in the state of Brahman, there's no more pain.
That was Nirvana.
I believe that's Hinduism. I mean Buddhism.
No, I'm pretty sure it's.
Okay, I've got it. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll look it up between now
I
and
think it's in the book as Brahman.
It's in the book as Brahman. That's what I thought. It's in the book as Brahman. Nirvana, if I'm not mistaken, it was Buddha, whom we'll talk about in a little bit if I get around to him today. Now, something else, folks, that I've hit on already.
So Brahman is the highest state of what?
Of Hinduism.
Of Hinduism.
Nirvana is Buddhism, which broke off from Hinduism. All right. Hinduism believed in nonviolence. Basically, they were pacifists. And folks, now here's what I have a real poor picture. And I have a brother who's a pacifist. I was pacifist at times, so today I hate the whole idea. Pacifism is a shortcut and a certain direct path to war. After World War I was so terrible, after World War I, everybody in the world seemed to become a pacifist. Into that scenario, step Hitler, Mussolini, and the rest, is history. And my wife was part Jewish, I can tell you, at one time the Jewish rabbis preached pacifism. Don't ever fight. After a bunch of them were thrown alive into ovens, hot ovens, kicking and screaming. Today, the Jewish rabbis do not teach pacifism. The Jews are some of the best fighters on the face of the earth. And when Saddam Hussein took Kuwait, he said, I'd even fight alongside of Jews to get my country back. If he fights alongside of Jews, he's likely to win. The Jews are some of the best fighters on the face of the earth. But between the wars, they taught pacifism. Until I'm serious about this, if you don't stand up for yourself and fight, the enemy will come in and take everything you have, enslave you, and even worse than that, throw you alive into the It's just like they did the Jews in World War II. I'm not talking about something now that happened. This is something that happened to my grandfather. When my father was about your age, about 5 or 6 years before I was born. And some people who survived it were still alive. This is where pacifism leads. And the people of India have gone through one war after another, endless amounts of wars. Karma That's the actions in this life that determine what you're going to be in the next life. All right, now into this scenario, and I still have about 18 or so minutes. Stepped a young man. I'm going to call him Buddha. He had a real name, but he's known to us as Buddha, and I'll call him Buddha. Buddha was a son of a king. And one day some soothsayer said, this son of yours is going to become a prophet of a new religion. The father became very upset. He said, well, I'm going to shelter young Buddha, and I'm going to make sure that Buddha never sees anything called sorrow. So Buddha grew up for the first 20 or so years of life and never saw anyone suffer, never saw anyone in pain. When he would go for a walk down the street, servants would go ahead of him and remove everybody who looked old or feeble or infirm, and to where he only saw the healthy and the rich people. Well, I had a boss at Lockheed who said, this story doesn't sound believable. I mean, folk, it's been told for 2,600 years, so you can believe it or not. This is an old story, I mean, really old. It reminds me of a case one time I heard where a couple decided, our daughter is never going to hear us quarrel. So she grew up believing her parents had never quarreled. One day she married, and if you can believe this part of the story, she and her husband got into a quarrel. Some of you might know better, I mean, yes, this happens in marriage. She got so upset that she actually took sick, so much so she had to be hospitalized. And finally, they're going to say, okay, you're upset because you're, well, let me tell you something. Your father and I might have been wrong in never quarreling in front of you, but we did quarrel. And quarreling is a normal part of living. It's natural and normal. Get well. Your marriage is not over. Your life is not over. You're not weird. You're not different from everybody else. Get well and go back and be a wife to your husband. All right, what does this have to do with Buddha? Quite a bit. One day, Buddha saw an old man. Somebody had not been diligent enough to remove him from his path. And Buddha started, what's wrong with this man? I mean, well, and they tried to explain to him, you mean I will someday become like him? You mean everybody? It just simply, he was thrown into a state of shock from which he never recovered. Well, he abandoned his title as Crown Prince. He went off and roamed for several years in an extreme state of misery. He eventually formed a religion we know of as Buddhism, in which he believed that the ultimate way of getting rid of any pain was to have no cares, no desires, get rid of desire, and all pain will go. He had 8 rights. You can be happy if you form, and I'm not going to try to quote all the 8 rights, don't get me wrong, but one of them was right occupation, right meditation, and right this and right that. But if you got all these things right in your life, you could find ultimate happiness. And basically, he developed a religion that we know of as Buddhism that was an offshoot from Hinduism. One thing he believed differently, though, from Hinduism, he believed that everybody, including the pariahs, the outcasts, could go directly from being a pariah to the ultimate state of existence in the next life, which, again, if I'm not mistaken, is nirvana. He believed that nirvana was the high level of existence as opposed to Brahman. Now, Buddhism was destined to almost take over India. It didn't quite, but Buddhism did move into the South Sea area, Southeast Asia, and it took over what is today, a lot took over what is today Cambodia, Myanmar it is, and has strong headroads into Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, and into Japan, even into Japan and Korea. It went into China and made some headroads into China, but we're going to find out the Chinese did not like foreign religions, and they kept foreign religions at bay, including Christianity, until it came to communism, which really was a foreign idea, but they embraced that as their own. But anyway, they embraced communism, even though it was foreign.
I just said something on there that says that Nirvana was the perfect peace and happiness, like that. Hinduism and
Okay, maybe there's a place for both of them then. I'll have to research that myself a little bit farther. Nirvana, I don't know, is the ultimate high state of existence. Now, Buddhism has been called a philosophy. We're going to run into this again when we come to Confucianism. We do not know for sure if Buddha even believed that there is a God. Even though a lot of the idea that you can come back in the next life and become something else, that's almost sounds spiritual. But some people believe this is just simply the natural order of things. It's a philosophy. Emphasis, placed on right purpose, right knowledge, right speech, right conduct, right occupation. Don't write these down. Right meditation, right awareness. Buddhism also held women in a higher position than the other Indian religions did. And this some of your author has to make note of about even though Buddhism did not make the women equal to men, it just made it maybe closer to equal, but not completely equal. Now, Buddhism is known, among other things, for building its magnificent monasteries, and like Christianity, it tries to proselytize, in other words, convert other people. Some religions convert and some don't. Judaism generally doesn't. Islam does aggressively. Christianity tries to convert, and Buddhism does. That's why Buddhism spread. Hinduism, they looked on that as being just for the Indian people themselves. All right. Buddha lived around 600 BCE, for whatever that's worth. Now, when I was a youngster, my dad told me that there are two types of statues of Buddha. Some of the statues show him being really, really thin and emaciated, and some show him being obese. And my dad said, we don't know which one is right. I got to thinking about that, and I think I know which one is right. Anyway, do any of you have any idea which statues, the ones that are showing him to be completely emaciated, the ones showing to be obese?
Probably
I think they're both right. Here's why. Extreme fasting, folk, is a shortcut, surefire way to become obese. Persons who fast will lose 7 pounds this week and gain back 10 the next. You'll lose 5 pounds a week after that and gain back 8 the week after that. Some of you, hopefully none of you know what I'm talking about. Anorexia. It can lead to anorexia. Basically what happens, your body goes into emergency mode so that when you do eat, your body quickly turns everything into fat because your body's expecting. So basically what I think happened was he fasted to the point of emaciation as a youngster. Then when he finally decided it's okay to eat, his body went haywire and turned everything he ate into fat. He became obese. I think that's a logical explanation. So both the statues are true. In other words, folks, don't try to fast your way to thinness. It will only lead to obesity. Disciplined eating, controlled eating, eating the right foods, and the best thing I've done is exercise. But fasting, it's a surefire way to get heavy. All right. Have any of you heard this besides in here? I can usually get a few hands. A few heads are nodding, a couple of hands. 3 or 4 heads are nodding, and 1 hand went up. Some of you have heard it. After Buddhism came Jainism. Now, Jainism, and I'm not going to be able to finish. The one thing I remember about Jainism was that they did not believe. All right, a big issue is the sub-beginning. How did the world begin? Jainism said the world had no beginning, it just always existed. What we see now has existed from eternity past and will continue to eternity future. There was no beginning. It was an extreme. They believed that happiness came from extreme rejection of the material world and everything in it. They did not attract very many followers, probably due to their extremism. Buddhism has been called the middle path. It was less extreme than either Hinduism or Jainism. So that's why Buddhism is sometimes called the middle path. All right, the political.
Came from denying material goods.
Yeah, denying material goods. I mean, completely denying everything, getting rid of everything that has to do with the material world. And if you do this, you'll be happy, and nothing will ever hurt you because you'll have nothing. In other words, you only get hurt if you have something you really like, and then somehow that something is taken away from it. Either it breaks, and therefore, I mean, folks, I'm not teaching this philosophy at all. It's just I'm teaching about it because it's part of. It explains why these people acted the way they did. Yes.
Is that just a more like extreme version of Buddhism? I mean,
It was Buddhism. Again, that's why Buddhism is called the middle path. It was Buddhism carried to an extreme. Again, we could spend a whole semester talking about these religions, and they're still very powerfully influencing Indian people today. All right, Chandragupta may have been part of Alexander the Great's army. Now, we have not yet gotten to Alexander the Great. We will in a couple of weeks, though. But Chandragupta Maurya it was believed he joined Alexander's army. And when Alexander left India, after defeating an Indian army or two in battle, he left India, and Chandragupta Maurya took over. And he built a large empire, and he was the founder of the Mauryan dynasty. The most famous member of the Mauryan dynasty lasted more than 3 generations. Folks. Some dynasties have been blessed with lasting longer than that. But the most famous, Asoka. Asoka was one of the members of the Mauryan dynasty. He conquered almost all of India, something that was not able to be done for hundreds of years, more than 1,000 years after his time. But after he had conquered a lot of India, he converted to Buddhism. And after converting to Buddhism, he devoted himself to peace. He tried to foster trade, believing that trade would help make the people wealthier. And let's face it, folks, I mean, you don't realize how important trade is. But I mean, if you try to put together something like, even like a radio, right here underneath our feet, we don't have enough materials. We have to buy this part from this part of the world, and that part from that part. We're trying to put together an automobile, you know, you have to get the glass from this part of the world. Trade is so essential to modern day technology. One area of the world will produce more of a certain thing than they need. So then they will trade with some other part of the world who is producing more of another thing that this part of the world needs. So trade is the only way you can ever put together something like an automobile, an airplane, a radio, a television. You've got to get the materials all together in one place. The materials come from all over the place throughout the globe. So trade, I mean, it was important even then. Asoka sent out missionaries to try to convert people to Buddhism. And he built polished stone pillars that would commemorate the events of Buddha's life and point the way to the holy places of Buddha. And basically, he was an all-out Buddhist, and who tried to reconstruct Buddha's life as best he could and say, Buddha did this here, Buddha meditated that here, and Buddha taught this from here.
So the stone pillars were what?
What's that?
He built the stone pillars.
He built the stone pillars himself, not Buddha, Asoka.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were the stone pillars for?
They were just simply places that were holy places. Christians do this, Muslims do this, a lot of religions do this. The places where the founder did this or that, they're called holy places. And shrines is another word for them. After Asoka died, it was to be 500 years before anybody could rule India. India fell under what they call the rule of the fishes. If you know anything about the life of the fishes, the big fish eats up the little one. And the big fish keeps on eating up the little ones until one day a bigger fish comes his way. And the bigger fish eats up the big fish. Then along comes the biggest fish, and it eats up the bigger fish. Who ate up the big fish, who ate up the little fishes. Simply the political winds of India just went back and forth to whichever army could win the most battles. For people who believed in peace, there was constant, continuous warfare, and it was undecisive warfare, just the wars that would never end. And war became to be looked on as glorious, the sport of kings. In other words, they engage in warfare the same way we have big league football teams engage in football games. Yeah, Denver conquered Seattle, and then Denver got conquered by Carolina. No, that might not happen, but we'll wait and see. But basically, their cities would fight each other in real warfare instead of in football games.
Like on a regular basis?
Oh, the fighting was almost continuous. Warfare. See, unlike the rest of Europe, India does not have what you call 4 seasons. Most of it's the summer, so they could fight any time of year. In Europe, see, they fight only in this. They go out to fight in the spring. And this was true in a large part of Mesopotamia. They go fight in the spring and return in the fall. Then go out and fight again the next spring, return in the fall, like baseball teams.
So I thought that he was all about peace.
All right, now you're catching on. The religion claimed to be all about peace. Now, what was the practical result? Continuous warfare that never ended. Went on hundreds of years, year after year after year. And when they finally, some outsiders came in, namely the Muslims, then eventually the British came in and conquered them. India was to spend the next 2,000 years divided. I'm talking about after Alexander. Divided and ruled by foreigners. Today, India is still divided into India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And they would like to all be united, but they're still divided. And may be for some time because
Are they independent?
they're independent today, but they are not united. Like they've been throughout much of their history, they've either been divided or ruled by foreigners. As recently as 1947, India was ruled by Great Britain. And then in 1947, Britain gave them their independence, and the rest has been constant bickering between India and its neighbors, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh.
Did they have to fight for their independence?
No, India, they didn't really fight. Great Britain, see, after World War II, conquest and colonialism became very much out of fashion. So they turned all these colonies loose. Great Britain turned its colonies loose, and France turned its colonies loose, and
Sorry about that, here's your country back.
the Netherlands turned its colonies loose, and what was the result? The result was most of these colonial peoples never did fully develop, and they wound up going haywire, whatever.
So
Well,
is India, Bangladesh, Nepal?
yeah, and
Pakistan?
Pakistan, yeah. Okay, I've got to quit, folk. All right, everybody, I hope to see you on Wednesday. We'll finish up with India and go from there to China. I'll look up Nirvana and
So we have a test next week on India?
the test is, oh, I should have not. The test is Monday. Okay, Monday, February 8th. Now, has everybody heard that?
So, wow.